so Boker Tov, today's Daf Yomi is Shevuos, Daf Yod Zayin, Shevuos 17. Today's Daf Yomi is dedicated for Shemir for the Chayalim and so for the Shuyim and the Yeshua for Am Yisrael on this Eis Tzara. Daf Yomi, the Daf Yomi tells us that Rabbi asked the following question. Because we had said that if you accidentally become Tameh in the temple and then you wait for the time it takes to bow down, then you're going to be liable to bring the carbon of the Yored. So the Gemara asks the question, Bari Rava, Tzarach Sheil Malkus or Ein Tzarach Sheil Malkus? 2 lines from the bottom, on the bottom of 16b, Rava asked the question, that which you said that you get, that if you wait the time it takes to bow down, get lashes, do you need to wait that time? If you accidentally became Tameh and then you didn't leave right away, you intentionally didn't leave, they warned you not to stay there, and you stood there less than the time it takes to bow down, do you get lashes for that or not? Now, this must be, most likely, this has to be according to the one who says that you get lashes even though it's a prohibition without an action, because there's no action that you're doing. That's the way most understand this Gemara. So, do we say carbon gemiri shehia or malchus lo gemiri shehira? For as it relates to a sacrifice, that with respect to that, we require you to be waiting to have to bring the sacrifice. But for lashes, we don't require that. Odilma, or perhaps we say on the top of 17a, bifnim gemiri shehia loshno carbon loshno malchus. No, or do we say that in a situation if you became tameh and within the courtyard, that's where you require pausing in order to bring the carbon, and also in order to get lashes, and we don't draw such a distinction. So the Gemara leaves this question unresolved. Teku, Bai Rava, Toa Atzmo Ba'avir Azara Mahu. Let's say, if you want to say that you need to be waiting there for lashes, where you accidentally became Tameh, and then you purposely waited the time it takes to do a service. Let's say you let's say you intentionally. So actually, no. Now the question is, let's say you suspended yourself. You didn't just wait there the time it takes to bow down, but you suspended yourself in the airspace of the courtyard. Mahu, do we say when we say require waiting in order to be liable for the carbon, that's where it's a waiting where you could actually bow down. But do we say Odoma where you can't bow down, we don't know anything about it. Odoma bifnim shehia gemira oshna debas shtachava oshna v'doav bas shtachava. Or do we say that within the temple itself we require bowing? Within, we just require waiting. It doesn't matter if you're capable of bowing down or not capable of bowing down. So Gemara says, let's leave this question unresolved. Hold on 1 second. I just want to just tell people that we're starting the Daf Yomi now. Okay, so now we continue. It says the Gemara, so if you want to say that you need to be waiting to get lashes, if you accidentally were matame and you intentionally waited, let's say you intentionally made yourself tameh. Do you also require shehiyah for there in order to be liable? That which you require waiting, that's only if you did it accidentally. But if you did it intentionally, it doesn't require it. Or else, or do we say that the concept of waiting, that's as long as it's inside the temple, it doesn't require if it was purposeful, accidental, or even purposeful. So again, take the By Ravashi, next case, Nazir Bekever by Shia Malchus, so Einot Sarach. What about if a person, a Nazirite, was that he became accidentally Tameh while he's in the cemetery. So in that case, it's similar to the courtyard, and meaning to say he wasn't liable when he came in because it was accidentally. And so, or let's say he entered into the cemetery in a box, and then his friend came along and removed the box from on top of him, and so now he's in the airspace of the cemetery, and they warned him, get out of here, and he didn't go, but he didn't wait the time it takes to bow down. So that's the question. Nazir bekever ba'ishio malchus oeno. Does he require to be wait? Does he require the time it takes to be waiting or not? Do we say bifnim gemiri shehiyah bechuslo gemiri shehiyah? That's where we require waiting in order to be liable. A carbon, that's only the time it takes. That's only in the Azara because there you could bow down. So we say that's how we get to that amount of time. Odoma ba'onis gemiri shehiyah oshna bifnim oshna bechutz. Or do we say no? It only matters if it was accidental. Then we say you're liable for the carbon only if it requires the time it takes to weigh down. But if it was purposeful, it's not going to be required. So the Gemara says, take it. We leave this question unresolved. Gemara says we leave this question unresolved. So now the Gemara says, next case, by Rav Ashi. So the Gemara says, Balo Baruka Chayav Vixara Potter. Then let's say you became Tamei in the temple. You have enough time to get out. If you went out the long way, you're liable. If you went up the short way, you're exempt. Amarava Katsara Shamro. This short way that you went out, you're not going to be liable for a carbon. I feel Akev beside Godel. Akev is the heel, Godel is the big toe. Even if you walk ankle over toe, meaning to say, you walk very slowly out. Even if you did the whole day, you're not going to be liable because you went out the shortest way. It's not the amount of time, it's the distance. So this amount of pausing is it enough to say that you're going to be liable? Let's say you pause the amount of you go out and you pause, and together it requires the amount of time to bow down. So can we combine them? So the Gemara says, well, why don't we learn it from the first question that Rava said that if you go out very slowly, you're not liable. The Gemara says, no, that's Hasam Dosha. There you didn't pause at all. In this case of Shehios, Mayu Sheit Starful, this is not the only time in the Shas that they ask this question about combining the Shehios. Gemara and Chulin talks about Shehiyah b'miot simanim. Now, you're not allowed to pause while you're doing a Shlita, but if you pause on a minority of the simanim, which are not necessary to make a kosher shlita, is that going to be enough to disqualify? Meaning you pause in a place where you didn't need to do it, is that going to be disqualified? So that's a question. Shehiyah b'miut simanim. What's the case? Gemara says, Bai Minaya Bai Miraba. Bai came and asked the question from Rabba. Bawa Ba'aruka Shior Kitsara Mahu. So let's say you went the longer way out, but you did the amount of time that it normally takes to go out the shorter way, but you ran out. Do we say Shi or Gemiri? V'chibalo Baruka Shir Kitsara Pater. Do we say it's the amount of time that's necessary to make you liable? And since he went out the longer way, but he did it with a shorter amount of time, he's exempt. Udoma Davka Gemiri Baruka Chayev Kitsara Pater. Or do we say specifically Dafka, it's specifically the longer way that you're liable, and we don't care that you went out in the short way, you ran out quicker. If you would have gone out the shorter way, you're exempt. The longer way, you're liable. So the Gemara responds, we can't say that you can go out the longer way as long as you go quicker. That's not going to be sufficient, and so it's not even allowed even by running, and so therefore you're liable. So the Gemara says, Maske for Rabbi Zera. So Rabbi Zera says, well, if that's the case, how are you going to adopt this position that even if you run out the shorter, if you run out the longer way, you're still liable because it's the longer way, even though you did it in a shorter amount of time? Well, what about that which we learned at the end of Sanhedrin? There we learned at the end of Sanhedrin that in Eloi Nasraf, and let's say there's a Kohen who's Tameh, who serves in the Azara, he is liable for death from heaven. Now, how can we ever have such a situation where he doesn't get kares? So, because if you enter into the temple while you're ritually impure, intentionally, that's kares, and if you do it accidentally, then it's a carbon all of the orid. So we say where you served in this case. How can we have this situation? So, if he didn't pause the amount of time in order to bow down, if that's what we're talking about, hold on 1 second. Okay, so the Gemara says, what's the situation? If he didn't pause the amount of time to do the avoda, well, then how would he have done the avoda? So obviously, that's not the situation. How could you have a situation where there's no kares? Either Shah, then he didn't. Then how did he do the avoda? Either Shah, if he intentionally waited, bar karesu. If he intentionally waited, then he's liable, and then he did it. He's liable for kares, and he no. So if that's the case, he's going to be liable for kares and not death from heaven. So the Gemara says, if you want to say it's the amount of time, then we could have a situation. We could have a situation where he did the service very quickly, and therefore he's liable for death from heaven. Eli on top of 17b. Eli Amras Davka Gemire, if you want to say it's if you want to say that which we said is exact amount of time, that it's only if he pauses that amount of time is liable, even if he went out there quickly. How can we have this law? Because a Kohen was Tameh. How can we ever have the situation where a Kohen is Tameh will wait in the mikdash the amount of time and he'll serve without being chayiv for kares? How can he ever be liable for death? So Amar Abai, my kushya, mishkachasa, we could have such a situation. Could go into Babak Tzara, he's going out the shorter path, and while he's walking out, at the same time while he's walking out, hafach betzinora, he uses his fork to flip the meat and thereby make it cook quicker. That's considered one of the avodas, just flipping the meat. As Rav Huna taught, a zar, non-kohen who flipped the meat is liable for death. So now the Gemara analyzes that. Gufa Amar Rav Huna, zar shafach. Because he's doing a service in the temple while he's tamei. He's doing a service in the temple while he's tamei. So the Gemara says, "Gufa Amarafuna Zar Shafal Pitzinora Chayav Mitzah." A non-Kohen who flips the meat is liable for death. What's the scenario? If he wouldn't have flipped the lo miachle, wouldn't have cooked pshita, it's obvious he's liable. He did the service. Either lo hafachu, nami miachle, but if he didn't flip it, it would anyways cook. My cover, what did he do? Versus no, it's the lo hafachu miachle betar tisha. No, we're talking about a case where if he wouldn't flip it, it would cook in 2 hours. V'hashta miachle b'chacha, and that makes it cook quicker. V'akamas from the whole kruve avoda. And this is teaching us that anything where you cause something to cook quicker is considered a service. We see from here that causing something to cook quicker is cooking. Yeah, exactly, Jeff. So, like, where is a perfect example of this? where you cause something to cook quicker. If you have something on the stove and it's not cooked yet, or in the crock pot and it's not fully cooked yet, and you just stir it, that's causing it to cook quicker. So that's going to be prohibited. So if it's already cooked, it's not causing it to cook quicker. So therefore, even if you're not causing it to cook quicker, ideally one should not stir something while it's directly on the pot, on the flame. You could take it off and have in mind to put it back, and then stir it and then put it back. It's prohibited to cook it while it's on the pot. If it's not on the fire, it's not prohibited. So therefore, that's the thing. Oh, so that's another, well, no, not lifting the pot, but also putting a cover on the pot is also making it cook quicker. That's also something you have to be concerned about. Yeah, these are things that a person has to be concerned about. If you have in mind when you take it off, you can put it back on. There's three things, there's different factors you need. You have to hold it in your hand. You have to have in mind. So these are things that there's ways to do it, but that's, so Amar Avoshaya, Ba'ina De'ema Milso, Mistafina Mechabraya. So Rav Oshaya says, that's why they say, like, if you're taking the cholent from the crock pot, you should ideally take it out of the crock pot when you take it, so that you're not stirring it while you're taking it. That's the ideal way to take the cholent. You shouldn't take it while it's still in the crock pot. If not enough heating element, you lift up the insert, take it out, and take the cholent. If you want to put it back, but some say you're not even allowed to ever put anything back into a crock pot. You go and put something into an oven, but not into a crock pot. It's a different level. That's what Rabbi Willard was saying. But anyway, it's a different question. The stones in the bottom of the pot is for a different thing. That's the concern. That's the concern of what's called hatmana, that something can't be completely encased, because then it'll even cook. Then you're not even allowed to do hatmana even before Shabbos. Some people say it's like a form of hatmana, of enwrapping it. Okay. Amar Avoshaya Ba'ina De'ema Milso Mistafina Michavre. I wanted to say something, but I was afraid of my friends. What was the thing I wanted to say? Hanichnas l'bayis hamenuga. What's a bayis hamenuga? A bayis hamenuga is a house with leprosy. Remember, Gemara in Sanhedrin, Parak Ben Sora Mora said never was, never will, but there was an opinion that there was. So the house, when you're in the house is tamei. Everybody's tamei, like a tumas ames, like a dead body. But let's say you go in there, derech achora, but you're walking in backwards. So the Torah tells us that you can't go in walking frontwards. Then once the majority of you goes in, you're tamei. But if you're going backwards, it's only once all of you is in. So if you're walking backwards, I feel a cool, even the whole body, except for your nose, meaning you're saved by your nose. Tar, then you're exempt. It says one who comes into the house. Derech habayis. Derech bias Torah. When do we say that you're tamei? If you came in the normal manner, but not backwards. If you came in backwards, it's not the majority of you, but all of you has to be in there. Mistafina mechaber, but I was afraid of my friend, said Rav Oshaya. Why? Cool nami. Then also, if you came in entirely backwards, you should also be tahor. No, we wouldn't say that kulo if you entirely came in. Of course, you're tameh, because you're not worse than utensils in the house. They'll say v'lo yitameh, v'lo. It says in the pasuk v'lo ufinu esabayis, and then it says v'lo yitma. It says v'lo yitma kol asher babayis, because obviously you need to take the utensils out, or else they'll all be tameh, and those were already in the house. So therefore, we see if it's entirely in there, it's tameh. And Tanyanam Yachi, now this is why it's relevant. It says in the Brisa that these rooftops that were in the courtyard of the temple, you're not allowed to eat koche kochim, and you can't slaughter the koche kalam there. The tamei shenichnas derech gagin, because they're considered part of the temple. But if tamei went into the courtyard of the temple through the roofs, lahechol, to the sanctuary potter, he's exempt. But it says, "Val mikdash lo tavo derech bias Torah." The Torah prohibits you going in via the majority, via the normal way, not via the only be up a dark, only in the normal manner. So now we're up to the next line of the Mishnah, which is going to bring us into a day and a half discussion of the laws of Nida. So the Shevuos is taking us to everywhere. Zui mitzvah sasei shebemikdash ein chayav and allow. So it says in the Mishnah, what's a Mishnah? What's a law? That if you don't go out right away, if you pause there, the time it takes to bow down, this is the positive commandment in the temple that you're not liable. So this Gemara is bothered what it means. Zui, this is, that implies from the words of our Mishnah, our continuation from a different Mishnah. What other Mishnah? What is the context here? So, and then it goes into a discussion of Nida. So, hey, what's the context here? The Kamar Zui that says this is. The Gemara says Hasam Kai, that our Mishnah is really in the context of Horios, where it says Ein Chayaven Alasei Va'alos Lasei Shevemikdash, where it says that if the Sanhedrin gave a ruling and the entire or the majority of Israel violated it, then the Sanhedrin has to bring a parahel davar shel tzibor, a bull for a mistaken ruling. And so the court is not liable. Ein chayavin, they're not liable. The court does not have to bring this korban if their ruling was about a positive commandment and a negative commandment of the temple. And they also don't, and the individuals, the Sanhedrin doesn't bring the par of Helam Davar Shel Tzibor, and the individuals don't bring an Asham Taloi on, which is a guilt offering where you're not sure if you sinned, on a positive and negative commandment relating to Tumas Mikdash. But they are liable. And the court is liable for Param Davar Shel Tzibor on positive commandment or negative commandment of Nida. And they would have to bring this guilt offering if they're not sure if they sinned with a Nida. The Ka'amar, and our Mishnah says, this is the positive commandment to the temple, they are not liable. And what is the mitzvah say of Nida that you are liable? That a param davar and a korban asham taloy. If she said she was if man was with his wife and she said she was not a nida, and then she says to him while he's with her that she's tamei nida. Uperesh miyad. If he immediately separates from her without waiting until his aver is mace, then he's chayav. Then he's liable for kares if he does it intentionally, and he's liable for sin offering accidentally. Because his departure gives him benefit or pleasure like his arrival. And this is not the only type of case where we have this type of situation where you're liable for the resident is liable for a korban, but it's similar in that you got into a place where you were allowed to be there permitted, and then you went out in a way which was prohibited. Yes, yeah, what was your question? Right, this was from our Mishnah. And our Mishnah discussed this, and now they're explaining the Mishnah. They're explaining the context. This was our Mishnah, and so therefore they're explaining it. They're explaining it. So now the Gemara says, Gemara discusses here about this law of the liability for a sin offering if you separate from the Nida woman while you're still in a state of where it's not an Aver mace. In Marabai Amar Mishmeder Priya Barav. That let's say if his wife told him that she was a nida and he didn't wait, he separated immediately. Chayav shtayim, he's going to be liable for two sin offerings if he did this accidentally. V'chein amarav amarav Shmuel bar Shva amarav huna chayav shtayim. He's liable for two. Chada knisa, one is liable for the entrance, because she was a nida, v'chada prisha, and one on the separation. And the Gemara is going to now discuss this on tomorrow's daf. What is the situation where he's liable for the entrance and the departure? And so that's going to be tomorrow's daf. We'll pick this up, God willing, tonight and tomorrow. Yashakoach.